Hi everybody. It's been a while since my last episode on the pre-tribulation rapture of the church, but today I would like to continue this series. This is part 3. If you haven't listened to the first 2 parts yet, I would encourage you to do so. I put all these videos in a playlist, there you have them all together. In the first 2 parts, I talked about types and shadows in the Old Testament. We found that the pattern is that there is one group that is being kept in the tribulation and one that is kept from it. The latter applies to the church, this new entity comprised of both believing Jews and Gentiles. She will be kept from the whole time period, and the remnant of Israel will be kept in the tribulation. In the second video, I showed from scripture why that is the case. What we call the tribulation period has to do with the nation of Israel and is called the time of Jacob's trouble in the Bible. I went briefly to the prophecy of the 70 weeks in the book of Daniel. One of the prophesied 70 weeks of years is still awaiting fulfillment, which is why this time period should more precisely be referred to as the 70th week of Daniel. This prophecy is for God's people and His holy city, that is, it concerns Israel and Jerusalem, not the church. Today, I would like to have a look at some more reasons as to why the church has nothing to do with this time and will indeed be raptured before it even starts. Let us go to the book of Revelation first. In chapters 4 through 19, we find the description of what we call the tribulation. Before chapter 4, we find the letters to the 7 churches. In chapters 1 through 3, the church is mentioned 19 times. In chapters 4 through 19, not a single time. This is an indication of the fact that the church is absent during that time, that she has been raptured. Chapter 4 starts with the following verse. After these things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven, and the first voice which I had heard, like the sound of a trumpet speaking with me, said, Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things. First of all, John sees a door. In John 10, Jesus says of himself that he is the door of the sheep. The door is in heaven. In 1 Thessalonians 4, we see that at the rapture, Jesus does not come down all the way to earth, but we will be caught up in the clouds and meet him in the air. The Church of Philadelphia is told by the Lord, See, I have set before you an open door, and no one can shut it. The beginning and the end of this verse have the same temporal expression. In the Greek, it is metatauta and means what we have just read here, namely, after this or after these things. Of course, one must ask oneself the question, after what? Well, as I have already mentioned, before chapter 4, we find the letter to the 7 churches. In chapter 1, John is given a timeline of the whole book. In verse 19, we read, Write the things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things. The things which John had seen was the glorified Christ. The things which were present tense for him, and still are for us, is the time period of the church. The things taking place after these things refer to a time period after the church age. In line with the purpose of the 70th week of Daniel, the church is absent during that time. She is not mentioned even a single time in these chapters. Another interesting detail in this context is the following. In each letter to the churches, we find the following sentence. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. We find that expression again in chapter 13, but note the significant difference. There, in verse 9, it says, "If anyone has an ear, let him hear." The part, "what the Spirit says to the churches," is missing. Why? Well, because the church isn't there anymore. John, as a representative of the church, hears the command, "Come up here." In 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 16, the rapture passage, we read, "For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout." This shout can also be translated cry of command, and other translations have that, the RSV for example. One translation says commanding shout. Darby renders it assembling shout. It is obviously the Lord's shout for all the members of the Bride of Christ worldwide to assemble and to come to him, and could very well be the "come up here" that John heard. Again, the time marker after these things is repeated. John had just witnessed the messages that Christ had given to the 7 churches, which were actual churches back then, but are also representative for the various characteristics of the church in general, as it existed throughout history. And he is now being told that he will be shown what will take place after the church age. So the open door and the command to come up point to the rapture. Which leads us to the next point. The first thing that John sees is the throne of God and God sitting on it. He also sees 24 other thrones around the throne of God and 24 elders sitting on them. Those 24 elders are clothed in white garments. In Revelation 19, verse 8, we find what the white garments are. There it says about the bride of Christ, "And to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, clean and white, for the fine linen is the righteousness of saints." The number 24 is interesting. Revelation alludes to numerous passages in the Old Testament. In 1 Chronicles 24, we read about David and Zadok dividing the priesthood into 24 different orders. In chapter 25, David divides the worship leaders into 24 groups. The number 24 is representative of the whole group. When the 24 chief priests or worship leaders stood before David, they represented the whole group or the entire priesthood. So the 24 elders would also represent a group, in this case, the church. The case can also be made that this number consists of 2 units of 12, the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. In Revelation 21, verses 12 through 14, we read about the New Jerusalem. Also, she had a great and high wall with 12 gates, and 12 angels at the gates, and names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 gates on the east, 3 gates on the north, 3 gates on the south, and 3 gates on the west. Now the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. The church is comprised of both believing Jews and Gentiles. In Ephesians 2, verse 20, we read that the church has been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. In Acts 2, we read that the early church continued steadfastly in the apostles' teaching. So the number 24 can point to the fact that the church is composed of both Jews and Gentiles. In chapter 1, verse 6, John says of Jesus that he has made us kings and priests to his God and Father. In 1 Peter 2, verse 9, it says, "But you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people." So we see that we as the church are priests. We find both offices united in the 24 elders. In 1 Chronicles, we saw that the number 24 was connected to priesthood and to worship. We see that role with the 24 elders as well. In chapter 5, verse 9, we see them offering the prayers of the saints as incense, which of course reminds us of the priestly duties in the Old Testament. On various occasions, we also see the elders in the role of worshippers. We also find that they are kings. Verse 6, where it says that they are kings and priests, is repeated in chapter 5, verse 10, in the song they sing, where the following is added, "And we shall reign on the earth." In chapter 3, verse 21, it says, "To him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne." The overcomers are all members of the bride of Christ. Their definition is found in 1 John 5, verses 4 and 5. "For whatever is born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus is the Son of God?" So, sitting on Jesus' throne together with him, as co-heirs with him and reigning with him, is a promise to the church. 2 Timothy 2, verse 12, addressed to the church, also says that we shall reign with him. The 24 elders wear crowns. This, and the fact that they sit on thrones, points to the fact that they reign. Angels, by the way, do not sit on thrones. They stand in the presence of God, so the 24 elders cannot be angels. The crowns also point to the fact that at this point, the bema seat lies already behind them. This means that what John witnesses in the following all comes after the rapture of the church and the bema judgment. What does he see? In chapter 5, he sees the scroll with the 7 seals in the hand of God, and no one is worthy to open it, read it, or look at it. John is deeply disturbed. But then, in verse 5, we read, "But one of the elders said to me, 'Do not weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll and to loose its 7 seals." John, together with the 24 elders, witnesses how the Lamb takes the scroll from God who sits on the throne. The 24 elders then worship the Lamb and sing a new song. It begins with, "You are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals." So clearly, the 24 elders, as representatives of the church, are in heaven before the beginning of the tribulation, which starts with the seal judgments, before the first seal is opened. They witness this firsthand from heaven. They are not on the earth anymore at this point. I will keep this short today and stop here for now, but we'll continue next time with more reasons why the church will be kept from the time of Jacob's trouble. See you next time.